Okay, we gave a number of shirim about how do you know that your spouse is Jewish, and one of my students who follows the shirim avidly suggested I give a second shir, or third shir actually, about a different topic related. I won't tell you exactly what the suggestion was, but I will tell you is that halacha doesn't ignore anything. There is no mitzias, there is nothing in the world which the halacha doesn't have to what to say it about. Yeah, remember once going into Rav Israel Orbach, and I was very excited. I had been in America in the five towns, and they invented a new contraption to get wine out of the bottle without taking the cork off. Right, it's called a Coravan device, and has a needle you stick in, and then uses air to pump it out. And I was all excited. I was wondering if this perhaps constituted an issue of bona on Shabbos. Makes a hole in the tub. Anyway, I said, I have something here that wasn't even discussed on Har Sinai. I said, there's nothing like that. Everything was discussed on Har Sinai. There's nothing new in halacha at all. It's only a question of application. It's only a question in these generations where we're so small and the questions are so complicated, right? And this is why one of the reasons I give these shirim, not just because I'm fascinated by interesting halachic topics, but I want to try and show how the halacha touches every single area, barring none. And therefore, today, as was suggested by this student, I'm going to speak about the concept of gender changing. Right now, in no way am I promoting this at all. In fact, the Sefer Dor Tapuchos, which was written by someone who lives here in the neighborhood, brings many, many isurim that are involved with this, right? But it is interesting. It's important to note, right? There are a number of cases which which are not done by choice, but happen, right? And let's just go through this before we start talking about a person who decides to change their gender with an operation, which is a serious isser, and it shouldn't be done. Yet, as the author brings here from the Sitz Eliezer, right, every Jew can come back. Doesn't matter how far you went. There have been Jews with tattoos all over their body or changing their gender, or no matter how far you go off, they could be in the deepest realms of other religions. You can always come back. And before we deal with those people, there are two situations in halacha which I like to talk about. One of them is if a person naturally changes from gender, right? And there's a number of tshuvas brought in the Sitz Eliezer about such cases, where a person undergoes some sort of natural change through hormone, not even by making a distinctive choice to do it, but it just happens. Yeah. And the question is brought up: someone's married, and his wife becomes a man, right? Naturally, it seems that such a thing could happen, right? A number of tshuvas, you saw in the Leiv Aryeh, and the Sitz Eliezer brings a number of sources about such things. Do you need to get a get? Right? Do you need to get a get? And that's a discussion, right? Maybe you only need a get from a male or female spouse, but if the spouse turns into a male or female, then you wouldn't need a get. Okay, that's extensive discussion. And in the midst of the discussion, there's brought one of the tshuvas from the Chumas Hadeshin. Now, the Chumas Hadeshin, half of tshuvas were made. He was a lot like me, except I have all my tshuvas fit into four categories, right? The one of four categories: either questions I've been asked, questions I've been asked now, questions I've once asked, questions that I've seen in Sfarim, okay, and questions that I made up, right? So those are the four categories. I try not to reveal for the discretion of the people who ask me questions, so I shouldn't get into trouble. But this is quite a common question, and I've received a number of emails about it. I've been advised not to answer all these questions, but the Chumas Hadeshin presents the following scenario, right? Somebody asked him the question. It's in Chuvas Psukim, Kuf Beis, which is the first half of the Sefer is questions they made up, yeah, that he And though all those questions are taken on basically Allah Maisa. The second half is called Chuvas Psakim. Those were real shayas we'd ask. And someone asked the Chuvas Hadeshan about Eliyahu Navi's wife. Right? Eliyahu Navi, he went up to Shemayim in a chariot of fire, right? As did Rishua ben Levi. The Gemara Ksuva says he just jumped into Gan Eden, right? So now, like, what happened to their wives? Bye bye. I'll see you in the next world. So meanwhile, she an aguna, right? So it's very interesting. We skipped in this kolel, even though we're learning Evan we skipped Simon Yud Zayin. Yud Zayin is Hilchos Agunas. The reason I skipped it is because in the Osir Poskim there's 4 volumes just on that. It's the most complicated halachas. Maybe we finished everything. Maybe one Zman we'll learn Hilchos Agunas. If Shalom was up to it. When Rav Avad Yosef was niftar, I remember the week he was niftar, I went to Rav Zio Auerbach, and Rav Zio Auerbach said Rav Avad Yosef was the last person who could matra aguna. So I said, so what's going to be now? He said, Hashem will hopefully not make any more agunas, right? Because no one is at the level today, kemat, where they can matra an aguna. In any event, they bring this halacha, because is this woman an aguna, right? Eliyahu Navi's wife, yeah, she sees her husband go up to Shemayim in a chariot of fire, yeah, is she aguna? Can she be married? So suggests the Chumas Hadeshan, again in Chelik Beis, Kuf Beis, he says, she's not an aguna. She's allowed to get married. Why? Because it says, Eishes re'ehu v'lo eishes malach. Eishes re'ehu v'lo eishes malach. Yeah, okay? Right? Somebody who's married to a malach is not married. Right? If your husband becomes a malach, someone like Yaakov, becomes a malach, right? He's only a few steps away. Yeah? Better tell your wife that when you get, not married. Is that person still married? So says the Chumas Hadeshan, no, you're not married. Why? Because it's Eishes Ish. Eishes Ish, v'lo Eishes Malach. Says the Chumas Hadeshan. Says the...
Usually nowadays they think they would pay a mouth that way you give it that.
Right. So says the Sicily Esser. He wants to suggest, yeah, Eishes Ish, v'lo Eishes Isha. Right? Just like if a person becomes a malach, the person becomes an angel, he's no longer married. Maybe if her spouse becomes a different gender. Yeah, Now, this is what he suggested. And now again, he's not talking about the operations, right, which are done to change a man to a woman. Not discussing that at all. He seems to think maybe he is. I don't believe so. In the end, he agrees that he spoke to him and he told him differently. But this is the question, right? Now, I personally would not learn that from the Chumas Hadeshan. Why? Does anybody know why? I don't believe that's a good supposition.
It says Eishes Lot. Eishes Lot. The Teva.
Therefore,
it's not the thought operation, so it's not like good stuff
to
say.
So it's true. Eishes Lot, yeah. There was no problem for Lot to get married again. He didn't need a heter meir rabbanan, right? If your wife becomes a pillar of salt, then you get married, right? That's for sure. Okay, but what about Eliyahu Navi, Shlomo Levi? So the Chumas Hadeshan says they get married. He says the nafkamina if someone else becomes a malach, someone like Yaakov, he becomes a malach. Are you allowed to get? They're giving you a lot of compliments today. Is he allowed to get remarried? So I humbly suggest, yeah, I don't hear so much what the Tzitzit was saying, because there's a difference between a malach and between a natural change of gender. A malach is a totally different entity. Yeah, he's in charge of fire in Shemayim, right? A person cannot be married to a malach, but a woman and a man, okay, they're both human beings. They're both Homo sapiens. Yeah, so just because a woman changed into a man through natural means, or a man changed into a woman through natural means, doesn't mean they're not married. Yeah. There is nothing. Is that a man who marries another man? It has zero halachic, what's the right word? Significance. They are definitely not married. Nothing. So that's the question, right? If the man naturally becomes a woman, or the woman naturally becomes a man, they're still married, and it's a dispute amongst the poskim, right? And there's no clear hachra on it, right? We would probably make them, and the Levi talks about it. He has a big back and forth. The question is, when we say Mises Habal, right? There's two ways. There's two ways for a woman to become mutter, to marry someone else, either a get or Mises Habal. Famous story about a guy who didn't want to give a get. Yeah, he was obligated to. They brought him to a grave and they hung him over the grave. They said, either you give a get or we do Mises Habal. Okay, I believe that's practice has stopped because of legal reasons, but Mises Habal. So in the Sefer Levi Rav Grasnas, right? He discusses, is Mises Habal only death, or what about if a person stops being that gender? Said it. Okay. There's a lot of back and forth, but in the end of the day, right, it seems to be the conclusion of the poskim is that it's not clear. It's really hard to prove it, right? It's really hard to prove from this tshuva, from the Tshuva Sedesh. Now, the Tshuva Sedesh was the Gedolei Rishonim, right? Halacha kamosa v'kol makom. Halacha kamosa v'kol makom. And I wanted to make a little bit of a diuk. The Chumas Hadeshin himself writes, the nafkamina in the shaila is if someone becomes a malach, right? No one wanted to suggest that the nafkamina if someone becomes a man or a woman, right? But in any event, it's not talking about a person who decided to have an operation. It's not talking about that. It's talking about a natural change. Now, in another tshuva, which did not make it to the Marmakoms today, right? The tshuva is in the Sicily Ezra, Chelik, where is it? Chaf Beis, maybe? One second, let me tell you. Sitz Eliezer, I believe. One second. The tshuva that I brought on the Marmakomos was one of them. The second one is in this new Sefer Tzchar Hashem is going to be Hanav Gimel. So there, it's Chelik Yud Aleph Siman Ayin Ches. And there he talks about an interesting case. There was a baby born. It had the outer appearance of a woman, the physical appearance of a woman, but inside it was a man, right? X chromosomes, XY chromosomes, right? The cell makeup was that of a woman, but the cell makeup was a man, but the physical makeup was a woman. So this, what he calls the Yitzur, this creation, cannot have children. It has a male, genetics to it, right? And it could be this girl should be a big baseball player, or football player maybe, if when she grows up. But right now the question was, and a Dr. Schussheim, apparently he's a famous doctor in Yerushalayim, he said we would like to make it a woman because she physically appears as a woman, and the Sitz Lezer concurred. Now, based on that, in the Sefer, it's not androgynous. So androgynous is when you have both, right? Now, 2 points here. He wanted to bring a proof from this, the fact that Sitz Lezer says you can make it into a woman, and not only that, he says androgynous. You also could decide if you want it to be a man, you can be a woman. You can decide which one works out better for you, So based on that, the Mechaber Sefer here, who's a Chashav Yid, when I was learning the sugya, he came over and brought me a Sefer. It's not available in stores because for obvious reasons, but Dor Tapuchas, So he writes here that he understood from the Sitz Eliezer that this would apply to operations as well, where a person decided to change their gender. And I humbly believe that that's not true. Is that because the person was born with both genders. So that Min Hashamayim, he's two. We can't define him as one. He's called androgynous because it's opposite. David, here, one contradicts the other. You can't be both. You can't be a man and a woman. Right. Although I heard today you can. No, on the forums they have 64 choices. I just filled out a form this morning: male, female, other, both, neither. 70% this, 20% that. A college student, was by our house the other day. No, a few years ago actually, before Corona. He said they don't believe in two genders anymore. It's just a spectrum. We're somewhere along the spectrum of genders. And a lot of things are changing because of that. Unfortunately, the world is getting off the charts liberal. But the point is like this. The point is you can't compare these two cases, because that person really has the physical makeup of both, Or in the case of Eliezer, its physical makeup is like a woman, and its genetic makeup is like a man. But that's a real makeup, Yeah, that makeup is a physical makeup of a woman. On the other hand, when someone gets a surgery to turn them into to look like a man or woman, that doesn't make them man or woman. And in fact, he brings here from another tshuva sefer, which I'm familiar with. He was the Rav in the Netherlands for a while. It's called Sheva Rafe. Let me see if I can find here. He brings from him that he writes. He asked Kama Gedoli Ador, and they all said Pashas here. I quote you, it's on page 100 here. He writes, Kibaldi chose Mikami Gedoli Horoa. V'kulam pe'echad anav amru, shnituach lo shina ma'madai v'zusa ishos. Nothing. It does absolutely nothing. They remain the original species, right? And then he got a letter from Rav Waldenberg himself, and he wrote like this. He wrote, Mikol Magam Srichin Lakarvo Layadus, meaning, he understood, yeah, even though they remain the original. In other words, a man who becomes a woman, he's still a man, he still has to put on talis and tefillin, he has to still daven 3 times a day, obligation, mitzvah seishma and grama, he's chayven, all the mitzvah seishma and grama, right? Lulav, Esrog, Shofar, right? He's chayiv maker. Then it's just, okay, he looks like a woman now. Okay, there is such a thing as getting an operation to go back. He speaks about that here in the Sefer. But the point is that he is completely a man as before. Now, there is an interesting point, and I remember discussing this with Safrani. What about sneas? Yeah? How does he, she, it, whatever. I think maybe they have a term by now for them, right? How do they dress, right? If they dress like a man, well, they look like a woman. If they dress like a woman, they're really a man, right? Question number one. That's question number one. So Rav Safrani told me an interesting hurrah. He said they have to wear clothing which is what they call unisexual, right? Baggy clothing, which men and women would both be able to wear, right? Because it's not really clear. Okay, that's one issue. The second issue is where would they sit in shul, right? Do they sit, on the men's side, on the woman's side, right? Probably we would put them on the woman's side because they look like a woman, right? But maybe they should sit in the back somewhere. Again, this is what Rav Waldenberg said. We want to carve them to Yadus. So even though they made a unfortunate choice to change gender, now it is true, and my Charusa was very empathetic about that, very strong about it. Many people in the past changed genders because they really felt very strong tendencies towards the other gender, right? And it was like, that was their whole being. And that was maybe 40, 50 years ago. Today it's become en vogue to change your gender, for whatever reason. And it wasn't justified then. It's even more non-justified now, right? So, but that doesn't close the door to tshuva. This is what Sitzler is saying. A person, no matter how far they get, and there's a story about a Jew, he covered himself from head to toe in tattoos. And when he met the rabbi who used to teach him in school, he rolled up his arm and he said, I left one space over here for my tefillin. Why didn't put tattoos for when I'm closer with tshuva. Yeah? And there was a girl, she got on her arm tattooed, right? The pasuk, right? Don't put on yourself Ksuva's karka, right? And with the Shem Hashem on it. And the Shaila came to Ravad Yosef, and the question was, can you erase the Shem Hashem? She has a tattoo on it. So he's matter to do it with a non-Jew, to do it, with a Shinoi. 2 changes, a non-Jew doing it with a Shinoi. He's matter that. It's never, a person, there's no such thing as going too far. Even Rav Eliezer Mendordia, the Gemara says, who got to the lowest point that a human being can get in this world, the lowest ethical, moral point the person get, they can still do tshuva. So, in summation, right, the question was asked to me, how do you know your spouse is really a man or a woman, right? You could ask them, hopefully they're going to tell you the truth. I'm not going to say the name. One of the Gedolei Rosh Hashivas today told me that he was living in a certain state in America, and he was asked this question. He was asked, I just found out my kala used to be a man, right? If it's Doraisa, I'm going to break off the wedding. If it's Rabbanan, I'm going to be lenient. Said the Rosh Hashiva, the time has come to leave America. He got up, he brought his family to Israel. Today, he has outstanding Talmidei Chachamim, a very successful yeshiva. and his children are outstanding Talmidei Chachamim, one greater than the next. And that's it. It's very hard to be in an environment where a person is being influenced by people who have confused values. Yeah, confused values. So I hope I'm not insulting anyone out there. I'm sure that I am. Yeah, I'm sure that I am. But as that same Rosh Hashiva, when he was sitting on the plane next to the head of the Israeli Homosexual Society, he was asked, "What do you think about homosexuality?" He said, "Zasur, right? It's asur." And this person actually, who is also the head of another big organization here in Israel, he wrote, I was blown away by this Rosh Hashiva, how intelligent and how clearly and sensitive he was to talk to me. In any event, Tein l'chachamim v'yachkim od. Basically, we're coming out with three levels, right? A person who naturally changes from a man to a woman or a woman to a man. It's not clear their status. The Sitz Eliezer wants to suggest that maybe they become the new status, right? At least vis-a-vis a get when concerned, right? That their wife, right, the wife or the husband of this former man or woman who changed naturally, doesn't need to get to like an Malach. I side more with those who say that you do need to get, because I'm differentiating between a Malach and between a person. That's one level. The second level is androgynous, who has both, right? Who has both. There, the Sitz Eliezer rules that they could choose one, have an operation, take one off, and then they will be that min, right? And there's a third issue, which is the person who decides to change genders. That person is definitely still remains what he was before, right? If he's a man, he's still a man. If he's a woman, he's still a woman, right? There's a couple of shilas about their clothing, about the size of the mechitza, right? There's room to argue that maybe there should be slightly different questions, slightly different issues involved, of sneas, yichud as well. So these should be brought to a rabbi if it's nogea, if you find yourself in the presence of such or one is one of these individuals. In any event, perhaps the most important thing we said today is what the Sitz Eliezer says. Even they could do tshuva, and that's Tekanos Hashavim, right? No matter for how far off you go, you could always come back. Hashem wants us to tshuva, every single Jew. And just the opposite, the farther away you've gotten, the more chaviv it is to Hashem. And if you are a person, if you are a Jewish person who has changed their gender, and you're watching this today, right? Just know that the doors are open to do tshuva, always to come back and to return to Hashem, and to the doors never close. And if just the opposite, Hashem is much, much more taken aback by somebody who has gone very far away. This is what the Maharal writes. This is the Indian of Schar Psios. He says, the farther you come, the more av there is. Because lefi the distance that a person is from Hashem, when you come back, that's the level of the kira, of the closeness. Hashem should help each and every Jew to come back to Hashem, each and every one of us, because a person who speaks Lashon Hara is also not clean. You know, we all have the averas that we have to work on, each and every one of us, and Lashon Hara is one of the most serious of them all, and we all have to work on it, each one according to our level. Hashem should help us, all of us, to be Choser B'Tshuva Gemura. Amen. Kain. He. Ratzon.